All right. Hi, it's Dr. Ron Eglin, and welcome to Assessment Assistant Part 4. This is where the rubber starts to meet the road. This is where we're actually going to be doing some things here. So I had talked in the last video about creating the models. So in this case, I actually have created a number of models, and I tried to logically group the models. One of the things that I did is I created an abstract application assistant abstract, which had one of the properties of each model that was going to be common to every single model. So let's look at a little bit of what we did here. I'm just going to start with, let's just start with academic program. Academic program is one of the models, and notice that I have this public int 64 academic program ID, which is both a key and database generated. That is going to make your life easy if you do that, but what you got to do is make sure that you also put in the system component model data annotations and the schema annotations so that you can do that. So when you're working from there, everything else is really going to be about. Now, here, one thing that's important, database generated option identity means that the database is going to generate that value. It's an identity value, so when you do an insertion in the database, that number is going to get assigned. It's going to be used later because we do use that in our foreign key when we're doing foreign keys. And let's look at how this foreign key works. And there's one that we can work on that's relatively easy. Academic program has multiple program outcomes. Okay? It's a 1 to n. One academic program, multiple outcomes. So I have this public list program outcome of program outcomes. If I come down here to program outcome, you're going to see that it's also public class program outcome. It's also got its key. It's also got that key being database generated. I do that for every single table. They're all database generated. And but now, because this has a one-to-many with program outcomes, I also have to have the other side of the coin, which is the many-to-one from program outcomes to academic programs. In other words, if you have a foreign key type of constraint, you have entries in both models. Their entry in one model is a list to the other. That's the 1 to the n. The n side has a single academic program ID that points back to the academic program and an instantiation of academic program. Those two. That's going to be crucial because when you're building the interface, you're going to want to have access to the information about the academic program when you define a program outcome. Now, what's going to happen is this model, again, remember I said you start with that documentation. That documentation is crucial because it tells you how to build these models. Coming over here, you're building the models, and the models can get relatively complex, especially since you're dealing with dependencies between individual models. That's where the thought goes into. Think out the models. But one thing that I'll tell you that makes your life easy is first create an integer-based primary key that is going to be an identity for each of your models. It's going to make your life just much more simple if you do it that way. Doesn't mean you have to. Then when you're creating the foreign keys, one side pointing to especially one to many foreign keys, one side pointing to here's your one with your list pointing to the many, then down here in the many with the pointer back to the academic program ID on the other side. The other thing is what is nullable. Okay? To make something nullable, you put a question mark behind, after this. Now, I've made a decision that the program title cannot be nullable. It has to have a program title. Obviously, the primary key cannot be nullable, but then you come down here and say, well, when I'm building an academic program, I don't want to have to put in all these program outcomes right off the bat, so they need to be nullable. They need to be able to be null. When I come back the other direction, however, the program outcome has to have an associated academic program with it, so they're not nullable. Okay? See how that works? Now, when we scaffold out the interface, you're going to get to see how the interface deals with these types of options. But these are all things that you're going to have to think through before building your models. Now, other things such as, like here I have the display and the name program title, those can wait. These, however, the key, what you're going to use to generate the database, those should not wait. All right, so let's go back to the app. Let's go now to the application DB context and look at one thing that I did in application DB context. And I'm actually going to do more in here because I have to do some override. I have to do an override of the on model creating. I'm going to have to do that. I'm also going to have to do a little bit of an override with the identity DB context also. But what I did do in application DB context is, and I could have done this in a separate context file. I've done this a few times, and I just never like doing that. It ends up, if I'm using code generation, it tries to create two query strings. It puts the identity into one database table and everything else into another. And I'm going to actually be overriding identity. I'm going to be overriding some of the fields with this, because I'm going to go from identity user and to application user. Now you're going to see that in another video, but that's kind of important. But one thing that I did do is all of the models that I created, I have entered as properties in application DB context as a DB set of that specific type. So academic program has academic programs, program outcomes have program outcomes, academic courses, academic courses. Those all live right here. Okay, now I have, and if I look at this, it's going to say, oh, look, I've got all of these non-nullable properties. Now the question is here, can I have them nullable? Well, the reality is, yes, I can. So I can make this nullable here. And that actually, if I went ahead and made all of these nullable, because you don't have to have these to instantiate this. You are going to, however, need the, there's going to be independencies as you work your way through later on. That's going to get rid of that. Now, I am going to be working on my override of on model creating, because I'm going to have to deal with the fact that I've got multiple one-to-many relationships, and in the cases of some of those relationships, I'm going to have to define them. Why do I have to define them? Here's why. Because in, let's say, let's pick one that has two. Okay, here, where I've got two one-to-manys, the one-to-manys have to be defined of what do those go, because this is going to point to program outcomes, this is going to point to academic courses. If you have a situation where you've got the n to 1 pointing backwards at something else, guess what? It's not going to know which one is which. In other words, it's not going to know where to define these relationships when you're building the database. So you're going to get an error when you do that. We're going to look at that as we go ahead and build this. But what I wanted to focus on in this video is the fact that you've got to get some of these things defined. Now, one of the things that you're going to run into, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to go ahead and take you through this. Now that I've created this, I can go to, I've created in Pages academic programs. I can right click on that, and I can build the Razor components, but I can actually do it from scaffolding. And if I want to build all the CRUD for academic programs, I'm going to need to do all of them. Now, academic program, database context is here, and I click add. Now, this will likely, I don't know what it's going to do right now, but I'm likely going to think that it's going to error out. There's a lot of things that are difficult to work with the scaffolding. Okay, in this case, there was an error running the selected code generator. Sequence contains no elements. All right, so that is cryptic. Not only is it cryptic, if you're looking to get any help from the Microsoft documentation, you're likely going to be disappointed. But there's a few things that you do need to check in the scaffolding. Okay, so I'm going to click OK. Well, first is the fact that to even do scaffolded components, you do need to create, you do need to have certain packages installed. So let's go over here to the packages, and well, right off the bat, one of the things that you do need to have to make this work is all the packages that are defined, that are in either scaffolding or code generation, all have to have the same version number. This is not always going to be the case. When you're installing these, it's going to install the latest version number, and you might have one that's already installed that is the different version number. Like in here, ASP Net Core Identity UI is at version 6.0.1. Now, what I could do is go to the update, and as you noted, it's got a number of these that it says it wants to update. Now, notice it's trying to put all of them at 6.0.3. The reality is I only would like to do this one here to 6.0.2, and that's just so that it matches all the other ones. By the way, to get to this, if you need to install a NuGet package, which you will need to do for some of these, is go Tools, NuGet Package Manager, Manage NuGet Packages, and let me go through the packages that you need. I'll make this a little wider. You do need the Entity Framework Core. You do need the Identity Entity Framework. Those should already be built there. ASP.NET Core Identity UI. But you also, if you're going to do any type of code generation, you need Entity Framework Core.design, Entity Framework Core.SQL Server, and I'm not sure if I do use the Entity Framework Core tools, but I think it's pretty safe to have it. Notice that I'm now going to go ahead. I've got 6.0.1. I'm going to update to 6.0.2. Should give me a little screen that says, hey, this is what I'm going to do. Click OK. Should say I accept the license agreement that goes with it. And that now should have all of these at the same version. Beautiful. Now, will this fix my scaffolding? Well, there's only one way to find out, and I might have to go through and go offline and figure out the cryptic error. Sorry, I'm not going to figure out every single cryptic error that you get for every single situation that you're going to run into. It's just part of life. It's part of Microsoft world life, but it is what it is. So I'm going to go with a new scaffolded item, add, and hopefully I am capable of getting all these. Now, this could potentially be due to some dependencies that I haven't worked my way through. That's going to come out in video. This is video 4. I'm kind of running out of time here. Here we go. Oh, by the way, in the future videos, I'm also going to have to create the database. And I'm going to have to create the migration and the database. Okay, so we're still got there was an error running the selected code generator. Sequence contains no elements. Now, here is something that I do need to tell you when you're actually, if you're trying to, because again, I won't be able to help you through all of them, but the best way to go ahead and do the searching on these is the entire error message. And you're going to have a number of locations where you can get help, Stack Overflow being one of them, and the other one being the Microsoft documentation itself. But one thing that you should always look at is the date that response came in, because again, Microsoft is constantly updating them. There's like this one is back from 2015. There's a video, but that video is from 2015, so it's likely going to be relatively useless. So you do have a lot of places here where they've kind of tried to work you through this. I will work through this offline and come back and report back to you, so you don't have to sit here and watch me go through reading documents for 20 minutes. But this is where we're at. This is the world of Microsoft. I'm sorry that I'm going to leave you on an error message, but I will come back and fix it. Reality is right now I don't need to scaffold the interface elements anyway, but you're going to get to see how to do it. Thanks. Good programming.